The wind had been restless that spring of 1873, carrying dust and omen across the sunburnt plains of the Arizona Territory. Out on the Townsend Ranch, where the mesquite trees leaned like weary sentinels and the mountain stood blue and far, 19-year-old Clara Belle Townsend had learned to read the moods of the land. The wind spoke before trouble came, and that evening, it carried a whisper that chilled her more than the coming night. Her father, Ezekiel Townsend, and both her brothers had ridden south 3 days earlier, driving a herd toward Tucson for trade. That left Clara alone with her mother and the two ranch hands, Jim and Hollis, who were as loyal as they were uneasy. The ranch sat miles from the nearest neighbor, too far for comfort, too close to the lands of the Apache, whose raids had grown more daring with every passing moon. Clara had grown up on the frontier and knew fear the way one knows thunder. It rumbled, but you learned to keep working under its shadow. She spent that day as she always did, mending fence wire, feeding the stock, and patching her mother's worn sunbonnet. But by dusk, even the horses seemed uneasy. The sky burned copper, and the sound of the wind through the sagebrush carried something more than rustle, something like footsteps. Inside the house, her mother prayed quietly as she lit the lamp. Clara glanced at the rifle above the mantel. The old Winchester her father had said was a friend in times when a man ain't near. Her fingers brushed the wood and she swallowed hard. Then came the dogs, barking wild, desperate, and then silenced too quickly. The door burst open. Jim stumbled in, blood streaked across his temple. "They're comin', Apaches, scores of 'em." He gasped before collapsing. Clara didn't think, she moved. She grabbed the rifle, slammed the bolt, and rushed to the window. Through the gathering dark, she saw shadows. Men on horseback, painted and fierce, circling like wolves. Her mother screamed for her to hide, but Clara stayed. The first torch landed in the haystack, bursting flame into the wind. Another hit the barn. The night turned red. Then came the rush. Hoofbeats like thunder, shouts in a tongue sharp and wild. Hollis fired from the porch, dropping one of them before a spear struck his chest and sent him sprawling. The firelight painted the faces of the riders, and among them she saw one different. A tall figure with a band of eagle feathers tied around his arm. Eyes not wild but calm, like the desert before a storm. Taza, though she did not yet know his name. The fight was short. 2 against 20 is no fight at all. Jim, wounded, tried to drag Clara and her mother toward the back door, but an arrow took him before he made the gate. Clara's mother screamed her name, shoved her toward the corral, and then the world spun. Something struck Clara hard across the head, and the fire and shouting fell away into silence. When she awoke, it was to the rhythm of hooves and the scent of smoke and sweat. The stars swam above her, cold, endless, and uncaring. Her hands were bound, her mouth dry as bone. She tried to move but found herself tied to a horse's saddle, a blanket thrown roughly across her. Around her rode the warriors, silent shadows against the moonlight. One of them looked back at her briefly, the same tall one from before. His gaze met hers, unreadable, and she felt fear coil tight in her chest. They rode until dawn, when the red light broke over the mesas. The land changed, canyons and cliffs, stretches of wild cactus and rock where the world seemed carved by some ancient fury. By midday they reached a valley hidden between ridges, where smoke rose from small fires and children ran barefoot through the dust. The Apache camp. When they dragged her down from the horse, Clara stumbled, her legs weak and her head throbbing. A circle of faces surrounded her. Men, women, elders, all silent. She expected cruelty, even death. Instead, an old woman stepped forward, muttering words Clara could not understand, and dabbed her forehead with something cool that smelled of herbs. Confusion mingled with fear. Why help her? Why not kill her, as stories said they did? The tall warrior approached. His eyes, black and sharp, studied her with something that wasn't hatred. He spoke softly to the others, and they stepped back. Then in slow, halting English, he said, "You not die. You live. You belong to Taza." Clara stared, breathless. "Belong? I belong to no one." He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "White woman brave. Fire in eyes," he murmured, almost to himself. "Spirit strong." He turned and motioned for her to follow. She refused, so 2 young braves grabbed her arms and dragged her to a small hide shelter near the center of camp. Inside, she was left alone, the entrance flap falling shut behind them. She sat there in the dimness, shaking, every muscle burning with exhaustion and disbelief. Outside, she could hear drums, faint and steady like a heartbeat. She pressed her hands to her face and felt tears hot against her palms. Her home was gone. Her mother, God, she didn't even know if her mother still lived. Everything she'd known had burned away in one night. And now she was a captive, carried deep into a land of enemies. But as the hours passed and the sun fell, her fear began to twist into something else. Anger, defiance, a stubborn refusal to break. The Apaches might think her weak, but she was a Townsend, born of hard land and harder men. She swore to herself that she would survive. Somehow she would find a way home. When the flap opened again, it was him, Taza. He entered quietly, ducking his head under the low frame. In his hands he carried a clay bowl filled with roasted corn and strips of meat. He set it before her and stepped back. "Eat," he said simply. She glared at him, unmoving. "Why?" she asked bitterly. "So I have strength enough to serve you?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "No, to live. You will need strength." Then he left. She didn't eat at first, but hunger soon betrayed her pride. As the night deepened, she could hear the murmurs of the camp outside, laughter, music, the crackle of fires. The Apache were not the demons her father's men had spoken of. They were people, families, children, a tribe living as the land allowed. And that thought unsettled her more than anything. Days passed. She was watched closely, though not harmed. The old woman brought her water, and now and then Taza came with food or furs. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with quiet courtesy. She learned his name from the whispers, Taza, son of Chief Cochise, a man both feared and respected. And somehow she understood that she was not merely a captive, she was a symbol. Perhaps a gift of fate or a test of peace between worlds long at war. Each night she would sit by the flap of her shelter, staring at the firelit camp, listening to the songs rising into the starry dark. The fear was still there, but beneath it something else began to stir. A strange, reluctant curiosity. Who was this man who had spared her when he could have taken her life? Why did his gaze linger not with cruelty but something softer she could not name? She did not yet know that her arrival had already begun to change the camp, that her presence would set in motion a story whispered across the frontier for years to come. For now, all she knew was that she lived and that the eyes of the desert were watching. Morning came to the Apache camp like an ember fanned to life. Smoke curling from cook fires, the scent of cedar and roasted maize thick in the chill air. Clarabelle Townsend awoke to the faint sounds of women grinding corn and children laughing somewhere beyond her shelter. For a moment she forgot where she was, until the flap moved and a shadow crossed the doorway. It was the same old woman, the one who had tended her wounds that first night. She entered silently, leaving a small wooden bowl beside Clara's bedroll, flatbread, dried berries, and a skin of water. Her dark eyes met Clara's briefly, unreadable but not unkind. Then she was gone again, a wisp of smoke against the rising sun. Clara sat up, brushing her tangled hair from her face. The air smelled of earth and fire. Her hands were no longer bound, but the memory of the rope still burned her wrists. Outside she could hear the camp stirring. Men speaking low in their tongue, horses snorting, the faint ring of metal against stone. It was a strange kind of order. A world completely apart from her own, yet humming with purpose. She remembered the raid, the flames licking at her home, the cries of the dying, and the moment when everything went black. She should have hated them, all of them. But hate, she found, was too heavy to carry when the heart was filled with confusion and the ache of survival. By mid-morning, she gathered enough courage to step outside her shelter. The camp lay spread across a small valley rimmed with red rock cliffs. Hide tents and brush huts dotted the ground, smoke rising lazily from the cook fires. Women worked with sure hands, weaving baskets, stirring pots, or tending to children. Warriors moved among the horses, proud and tall, their faces painted in ochre and white. And then there was Taza. He stood apart from the others, his long hair bound in a single braid down his back, the morning light glinting off the eagle feathers in his armband. He was speaking with two older men, elders by their bearing. And though Clara could not understand their words, she felt the gravity of the conversation. He looked up once, just briefly, and their eyes met across the camp. She felt a strange jolt then, half fear, half something else she could not yet name. Later that day, two young women came for her. They spoke softly, motioning for her to follow. They brought her to the river that ran beyond the camp, a ribbon of cool silver cutting through the red dust. There they gestured for her to wash. The water was cold, biting at her skin, but it felt good. When she emerged, they offered her clean garments, soft deerskin beaded with tiny shells. She hesitated at first, then slipped them on, realizing how her old dress hung in tatters. The women smiled faintly, and for the first time since her capture, Clara felt something almost human from her captors. That evening, Taza approached her. "You walk free now," he said, his English thick but careful. "No one will harm you here." Clara folded her arms. "You think freedom means living in a cage without walls?" He studied her. "You are not prisoner," he said simply. "You are under my protection." "Protection?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "You call burning my home and killing my people protection?" His jaw tightened. "War burns all," he said after a long pause. "You call my people savage, but your soldiers killed my brother, burned our fields, took our children. Who is savage then?" His words cut through her anger like a knife through cloth. She wanted to deny them, to tell him he lied. But she had heard stories, whispered in Tucson, of army men who'd done unspeakable things in the name of peace. She said nothing. Taza looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You are strong. You do not break. The spirits will see that." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the sound of the river. Days passed. The camp became both strange and familiar to her. She learned their rhythms, the morning hunts, the evening songs, the prayers whispered to the mountains. She saw laughter, kindness, even tenderness among them, and each glimpse chipped away at the image of savagery she had been raised to believe. Yet every night, when the fires dimmed and the stars came out, she thought of her family, her mother's face, her father's rough hands, her brothers out somewhere on the trail, perhaps not even knowing she was gone. The ache in her chest was a wound that would not heal, and yet another feeling grew alongside it, a restless curiosity toward the man who had spared her. She began to watch Taza more closely. He was not loud or boastful like some of the other warriors. He moved with quiet authority, a calm born of confidence and purpose. The others listened when he spoke. He was a leader, though young. Sometimes she would see him alone by the river at sunset, head bowed, murmuring to the water as though speaking to the spirits. Once, she dared to ask the old woman what he said during those moments. The woman only smiled and replied in broken English, "He speaks to his brother. Spirit walks with river now." After that, Clara could not look at Taza without seeing the sorrow that shadowed his strength. He had lost, too. One afternoon he invited her to ride. She refused at first, suspicious of his motives, but he only smiled faintly and said, "Horse needs sun. So do you." He brought her a small bay mare, gentle-eyed and swift. She mounted awkwardly at first, her hands trembling, heart racing, but soon the rhythm of the animal beneath her steadied her nerves. Taza rode beside her, guiding them along a narrow path through the canyon. "Beautiful land," he said after a while. "It's wild," she replied. He nodded. "Wild means alive." They rode in silence for a time. The air was clean, the scent of sage thick and sweet. Clara felt the wind lift her hair, and for the first time in weeks she felt something that almost resembled peace. When they stopped near a ridge overlooking the valley, Taza spoke again. "When I was boy, I saw white men build fences. They cut land in squares. You cannot cut sky, you cannot own wind. But they tried." Clara looked down, unsure what to say. "My people fight for this," he continued softly. "Not hate, just live." His words lingered in her chest long after they returned to camp. That night she dreamed of her home, but it was different. The fences were gone, and in their place was open land, wild and endless, the kind Taza spoke of. She awoke with tears on her cheeks and did not know why. Weeks turned to a strange rhythm of survival. Clara learned some of the Apache words: water, fire, sun. The children giggled when she spoke them wrong, and she found herself laughing too, despite the strangeness of it all. The camp began to feel less like a cage and more like a world suspended between fear and understanding. But whispers followed her. Voices among the women, sharp glances from the elders. She could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. She did not belong. She was a stranger, a danger perhaps, and yet Taza continued to shield her quietly but firmly. When others questioned why she remained, He silenced them with a look. His protection carried weight. One night, as the fires burned low, she found him sitting alone near the edge of camp. The moonlight carved silver lines across his face. She hesitated, then approached. "You could have let me die that night," she said softly. "Why didn't you?" He didn't look up. "Because your spirit is strong. A spirit like that should not end in fire." She said nothing, and for a long moment they sat in silence, the night wind whispering through the grass. Then he turned to her, eyes dark as the canyon depths. "One day you will see Clara Belle Townsend. The wind carries more truth than men ever will." Something stirred in her chest, a flicker, faint but warm. She didn't yet understand it, but it frightened her more than any battle cry could. For though she still dreamed of escape, part of her heart was beginning to awaken, not to captivity, but to something wilder, freer, and far more dangerous. The desert was changing her, and deep within its shadows, love was beginning to take root. Summer came hard upon the Apache lands, baking the red earth until it cracked like pottery and turning the air into shimmering glass. By now, Clara Belle Townsend had been in the camp long enough to learn its sounds: the whicker of ponies before dawn, the rustle of hides drying in the sun, the low hum of women's voices weaving stories older than any white man's map. She no longer woke every morning expecting rescue. The thought still came, but softer now, like a prayer she didn't quite believe. Each day she worked beside the women, learning their crafts with stubborn patience. Her fingers, once pale and soft, grew brown and calloused from the smoke of the fires. She helped grind corn, fetch water, sew hides, and when the others weren't watching, she practiced words in their language, whispering them under her breath until they felt like music on her tongue. They laughed at her accent, but there was laughter without cruelty. She was no longer the ghost in their midst, yet even as the tribe began to accept her presence, the talk around the fires changed. She heard her name spoken in low tones, always followed by Taza's. It was in the way the women's eyes lingered on her when he entered a circle, or how the men grew silent when he stopped to speak to her. She didn't know all the words, but she understood enough. The white woman and the chief's son. Such things were not meant to be. Taza came to her often. At first his visits had purpose, to check her safety, to bring food or herbs. But soon they spoke for no reason at all. They shared the slow rhythm of evenings, sitting by the river where cottonwoods leaned over the water and cicadas sang in the heat. Sometimes he told her stories, legends of spirits that shaped the mountains, of warriors who became stars. His English was rough, but his voice carried poetry. She would close her eyes and listen, feeling the cool wind move through her hair. One twilight, when the world was painted in copper and violet, she asked him, "Taza, what do your people say of love?" He looked at her thoughtfully, then replied, "Love is not word. It is wind. You feel it or you don't. When it comes, you cannot stop it, and when it leaves, you cannot hold it." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like heartache." He shook his head. "It is life." That night she dreamed of running through open desert, her hair unbound, Taza's laughter somewhere behind her. When she woke, she was angry with herself. Love, she told her heart, was not meant to cross such lines. But the heart of the frontier was wild. It didn't care for lines. Days rolled into weeks, and the air thickened with tension. Scouts brought word that white soldiers were pushing deeper into Apache territory. Skirmishes flared like brush fires. The elders gathered in council, and Clara could feel unease ripple through the camp. Some said her presence was a curse, that the soldiers would come looking for the white woman and bring death with them. One afternoon, while the council met, Clara sat alone near the river, watching dragonflies skim the surface. She heard footsteps and turned to see Naiche, Taza's cousin, approach. His face was hard, his eyes full of distrust. "You bring trouble," he said in halting English. "White men come because of you." "I never called them here," she said quietly. "Doesn't matter. They come. You make Taza forget his people, forget his duty." His words struck like blows. She wanted to argue, but before she could, Taza's voice came from behind. "Enough, Naiche," Naiche scowled. "She should go." Taza's tone was steady. "She stays under my protection." "That is the chief's word, and mine." When Naiche stalked away, Taza turned to her, his eyes storm dark. "Do not listen to him." But she saw the truth there, the strain between love and loyalty. "He's right, isn't he?" she whispered. "Because of me, your people are in danger." Taza shook his head slowly. "Danger already here before you came. You did not bring it." You only changed it. Changed it how, she wanted to ask, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said, "You should have left me to die that night." He stepped closer, the sun catching the bronze of his skin. "I could not." Their eyes locked, and the desert seemed to fall silent around them. Only the rush of the river and the beating of her heart filled the space between. She wanted to turn away, but his hand reached out, light as a whisper, and brushed the stray hair from her face. For one breath, the world stood still. Then he withdrew, and the moment passed like a shadow over the sand. The next days were heavy with what hadn't been said. Clara tried to keep to her work, but her thoughts followed him everywhere. To the training fields where he sparred with the young warriors, to the ridge where he stood watching the horizon. She told herself it was madness. A Townsend girl and an Apache leader, such things ended in blood, not in peace. Yet the feeling persisted, stubborn as the desert grass. One evening, thunder rolled over the mesas, promising rain. The air was thick and restless. Taza came to her shelter, his face drawn. "Soldiers near," he said. "Tomorrow we move camp," her stomach turned. "They'll find us, won't they?" "Maybe. We will try to make them lose the trail." She looked at him, then blurted the words she'd been holding back for weeks. "Taza, if they come, if they attack, promise you'll leave me. I don't want more blood spilled for me." He took a step closer. "You think I could ride away and let you die?" "I think you must if you care for your people." His jaw clenched. "And what if I care for you?" The world seemed to tilt. Rain began to fall, slow and heavy, drumming on the hides of the tents. Clara felt her breath hitch as he reached for her hand, his fingers rough, warm, trembling. "You are not my enemy," he said softly. "Maybe you were meant to show me there is another way." She wanted to speak, but words failed. So she stood there, the rain running down her face, and let him pull her against his chest. The smell of smoke and rain filled her senses. His heartbeat was steady beneath her cheek. In that moment, the world shrank to the space between them. No war, no borders, only two souls caught in the storm. When they finally parted, she whispered, "This can't last." Taza nodded. "Nothing on this land lasts. Only the stories." The next morning, they broke camp. Riders moved quickly, gathering supplies, leading horses. Clara helped where she could, feeling the eyes of the tribe upon her. Some looked with pity, others with anger. She didn't blame them. Love, she knew, was dangerous currency here. By midday, scouts reported soldiers only a day's ride behind. The tribe pushed into the high canyons where the land grew wild and defensible. Clara rode near Taza, the wind pulling strands of hair across her face. The landscape blurred, red cliffs, sun, dust. Somewhere behind them, the drum of war was coming. That night, they camped in a hidden ravine. Fires were forbidden. The night was silent but for the cry of owls. Taza sat beside her, staring into the dark. "If they come," he said quietly, "we fight. But not for hate, for breath, for freedom." Clara looked at him, the starlight silver on his face. "And if they win?" He smiled faintly, sad and calm. "Then the wind takes what is left of us. The wind remembers." She reached for his hand again, not caring who might see. "Then let it remember this," she said. "Not hate. Love." He didn't answer, but his hand tightened around hers, and together they watched the first light of dawn creep over the canyon walls. It painted the land in blood red and gold, a warning and a promise all at once. Clara knew then that whatever came next, their lives were forever bound. Two worlds tied by a love neither side would ever understand. A love forbidden by men, but written into the desert itself. The summer of 1873 bled into August with the heat of a forge. The Apache camp had moved high into the San Pedro Mountains, hidden among pines and stone where the air was thinner, and the soldiers' horses would tire before finding them. For weeks, the tribe lived in uneasy quiet, their lives balanced on the knife edge between peace and pursuit. Clara Belle Townsend had grown lean and strong. Her skin had darkened beneath the sun, her hair braided with leather and beads the color of sand. She could ride bareback now, her knees gripping the horse's sides as though she had been born to the saddle. She no longer flinched at the sound of war cries or thunder. But each day the air felt heavier, charged, waiting. Taza knew it too. He stood often at the ridge above the camp, scanning the horizon for the glint of metal, the shimmer of approaching riders. The soldiers had been seen weeks back near the Gila River. And word was they carried orders to rescue the white woman rumored to live among the Apaches. Rescue, that was the word the newspapers would print. The word the soldiers used for vengeance. That morning, Clara found Taza sharpening his knife beside the fire. The sun had barely crested the peaks, turning the sky gold behind him. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked quietly. He looked up, his dark eyes reflecting the light of the blade. "Soon," he said. Scouts saw smoke 2 valleys away. She knelt across from him. "You could take the tribe deeper into the mountains. Hide until they pass," he shook his head. "We hide every season. Every year they come again. One day there will be no place left to run." Clara felt the knot of fear tighten in her chest. "If they find us, they'll kill you." "They'll kill everyone." Taza smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "Then we fight. My father taught me a man cannot choose when he dies, only how." She wanted to argue, to beg him to leave with her, but his expression silenced her. He had already chosen his fate. Later that day, the camp grew restless. The women packed what they could. The warriors prepared their rifles and bows. Children were sent to hide among the rocks with the elders. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat and fear. Clara tried to help, carrying water, tending to the wounded from a small skirmish earlier in the week. Yet her heart raced every time she looked toward the horizon. She could feel the storm coming, not of weather but of men. By sundown, the first gunshots cracked through the canyon. Echoes rolled like thunder. "Soldiers!" someone shouted. Chaos broke loose. Warriors leapt onto their horses, rifles raised. Arrows whistled through the air. Clara ran for cover behind a rock outcrop as bullets tore through the brush. The sharp smell of gunpowder stung her nose. Taza was already in the saddle, shouting orders in Apache. His voice carried above the din, strong, commanding. He fired once, twice, dropping 2 bluecoats on the ridge. The soldiers, in their dust-stained uniforms, poured into the canyon like a flood, their bugles shrieking against the wind. Clara pressed her hands over her ears. She could see everything in flashes. A warrior falling, a horse rearing, a child screaming somewhere in the distance. The camp burned, the same way her home once had. History was repeating itself, cruel and perfect in its symmetry. A hand grabbed her shoulder. She spun. "It was Taza. Come," he shouted. She stumbled after him through the smoke. They ducked behind a cluster of rocks as bullets shattered stone around them. He fired again, reloaded, fired once more. The look in his eyes was not fury but focus, cold and precise. "They'll kill everyone," she cried. He didn't answer. Another volley rang out. A warrior beside him fell, blood bright against the sand. "Taza!" He turned, and in that instant she saw the soldier on the ridge raise his rifle. Without thinking, Clara threw herself forward. The shot cracked the air like a whip. Pain blossomed in her shoulder, white-hot, knocking the breath from her lungs. She fell hard, the world spinning in flashes of red and gold. Taza caught her before she hit the ground, shouting her name in a voice she barely heard through the roar in her ears. The world was fire and smoke and the smell of iron. He pressed his hand against her wound, his fingers slick with blood. "No," he murmured, voice breaking. "No, no." She tried to speak, but her throat was thick with dust and pain. The sky above her was a blur of smoke and sun. "They think they're saving me," she whispered. "But they're killing us all." Taza lifted her in his arms. "Hold on," he said fiercely. "You do not die today." He carried her up the ridge, the battle raging below. Warriors fell and rose again, shouting defiance against the tide of rifles. The soldiers pushed forward, burning what they could not seize. The cries of the dying echoed through the canyon. When they reached the high ledge, Taza laid her down beneath the shade of a rock. He tore a strip from his tunic and pressed it against her wound. "Stay here," he said. "No," she gasped. "You can't go back." He met her eyes. That same look she had seen the night they first met by the river. Calm. Unyielding. "I have to," he said. "They fight for me." Before she could stop him, he turned and ran back into the smoke. Clara tried to rise, but pain shot through her shoulder. She could only watch as the battle below turned savage. Men locked in close combat. The sound of screams and rifles mixing into something inhuman. The soldiers were better armed, but the Apaches fought with the fury of those defending their last home. Then she saw him, Taza, cutting through the chaos, his rifle gone, his knife flashing in the firelight. He moved like wind and shadow, unstoppable. But there were too many. A shot rang out. Taza staggered. "No!" Clara screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. She forced herself up, stumbling down the slope toward him. The world spun, rock, fire, blood. She fell beside him, catching his head in her lap. He smiled faintly, blood at the corner of his mouth. "You should have stayed," he whispered. "I couldn't," she said through tears. "Not without you." He reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek. "You are strong, Clarabelle Townsend. Like the wind." "Don't," she sobbed. "Don't you leave me." He looked past her toward the horizon where the sun was sinking. "The sun goes," he murmured. "But it always comes again." Then his hand fell away. The battle was ending. The soldiers were retreating, their bugles echoing through the canyons. The camp was smoke and ruin. The Apache who survived gathered their wounded in silence, their faces carved from grief. Clara sat beside Taza's still form until night fell. When the stars came out, she closed his eyes and whispered something she had never dared before. "I love you." The wind carried the words away across the mountains. She rose slowly, her arm wrapped in torn cloth, her body trembling. She could not stay, and yet she could not leave. She was neither prisoner nor rescuer now, only a ghost caught between two worlds. Some of the surviving women led her to a hidden cave high above the valley. There she tended her wound and waited, days blurring into one another. The soldiers never came back. When she finally walked out beneath the open sky again, the valley was silent. Only the ashes of the camp remained, the smoke long since carried away by the wind. She looked toward the mountains and whispered his name once more, "Taza." The land did not answer, but she felt him there. In the whisper of the pines, the cry of the hawk, the warmth of the sun on her face. Blood and fire had taken everything, yet somehow love had survived. It lived in her now, fierce, haunting, eternal. And though the frontier would tell its own version of the story, of a white woman taken captive and rescued by brave soldiers, the truth was something wilder, deeper. For Clarabelle Townsend knew what no one else could, that love, once born of war and bound by blood, could never truly die. It became part of the land itself, part of the wind that carried the songs of the Apache long after the guns fell silent. The year was turning when the fires of that battle finally cooled. The rains came late to the mountains, washing blood and ash into the gullies, carrying away the last scent of smoke. By then, the soldiers had long since ridden back east, leaving behind a valley littered with ghosts. Of the Apache who had fought there, few survived, and of the settlers who whispered about the white bride of the Apaches, none truly knew what had become of her. They said she died that day. They said she was rescued. They said she went mad and wandered into the desert, never to be seen again. But legends have a way of surviving where truth cannot. And in those mountains beneath the endless Arizona sky, Clarabelle Townsend lived on, not as the rancher's daughter she once was, but as something wilder, freer, and touched forever by love and loss. When she rose from the ashes of that battle, her wound still raw and her heart half broken, she found herself standing on the same ridge where she and Taza had once watched the sunrise. The valley below was silent now, blackened and bare, but the wind carried whispers, fragments of song, the echo of drums long stilled. She listened and felt him there, as though his spirit had melted into the land itself. She buried him herself, beneath the great white stone near the river where they had first spoken of love. She marked the grave with his knife and a string of beads, their colors faded by smoke. Then she sat there until the stars came, her face streaked with dirt and tears, the moonlight glinting off her hair. When she finally left, it was not to return to Tucson. She turned west instead, deeper into the wild country. The land was harsh, but she had learned its language from him. How to find water by following the cry of ravens, how to read the wind, how to walk barefoot without leaving tracks. She carried nothing of her old life save a small silver cross her mother had given her, and the memory of Taza's voice. In time, she found another Apache band, survivors, wanderers. Some recognized her. They called her Iskameda, the woman who returns from fire. They did not question her presence. The desert made equals of those who endured it. She lived among them through the passing seasons, not as captive nor outcast, but as something in between, a bridge, perhaps between worlds that refused to meet. She learned their tongue fully, their songs, their prayers to the dawn. She taught their children a few words of English, small pieces of the language that had once been her cage. And when the riders from the army came again, she guided her people to hidden trails, places no map could mark. Her wound healed to a scar that cut across her shoulder like a white river. It ached when storms rolled in, but she came to see it as her proof of survival, her bond with the land. Years passed. The frontier began to change. More settlers came. Rail lines carved through the valleys where buffalo once roamed. The war cries faded, replaced by the whistle of trains. Towns rose, then decayed, leaving behind graves and stories. Sometimes, riders swore they saw a white-skinned woman among the Apache bands that drifted through the mesas, her hair darkened by dust, her eyes the color of desert rain. They said she rode with the grace of a spirit and vanished whenever men tried to follow. The locals called her La Fantasma del Desierto, the ghost of the desert. In Tucson, the newspapers printed her tale as tragedy. Clara Townsend lost to the savages, they wrote, or sometimes miraculously spared. Each version sold well, and none were true. Her family's ranch had long been abandoned, its fences broken and its well dry. The wind owned it now, just as it owned her. One winter, a trapper named Jonas Keene came upon an Apache camp in the Chiricahua foothills. The tribe welcomed him. He traded knives for pelts, bullets for cornmeal. Around the fire that night, he noticed a woman sitting apart from the rest, her face half hidden in shadow. When she spoke, it was in perfect English, soft but sure. "You're far from the trading posts," she said. He nodded, uneasy. "Heard there was a white woman among the Apaches." "Didn't believe it," she smiled faintly. "Most men only believe what fits in their stories." He studied her. The braid threaded with feathers, the pale scar across her shoulder, the cross glinting at her throat. "What's your story, then?" She looked toward the fire, the flames reflecting in her eyes. "Once I belonged to the world of fences. Then I learned the world has no fences at all." The trapper didn't understand her meaning, but the next morning when he woke, she was gone. The tribe said she had ridden north before dawn. He carried that story with him to every town he passed through, and each retelling grew taller until she became myth. In the years that followed, the name Clara Belle Townsend faded from the ledgers and records of Tucson. But her legend did not fade. Travelers spoke of finding tokens in the desert, a silver cross tied to a cedar branch, a pattern of stones shaped like a bird in flight. Some said she could still be seen at sunset, standing on the ridge above the San Pedro Valley, her figure outlined against the dying light, and those who swore they heard her voice said it carried like a song, low, mournful, but strong, the kind that makes a man stop and listen even if he doesn't know why. The Apache elders told their children a different story, of Taza the warrior and Iskame Da, the woman from fire. They said the Great Spirit bound their souls together, one from the earth and one from the wind, to remind all people that love was not the property of nations or color, but of the heart alone. When the summer storms came, they said the thunder was Taza's horse running the sky, and the rain was Clara's tears falling to cool the land. One night, many years later, an old prospector found himself lost in the same mountains. The moon was thin, the wind sharp as a knife. His horse had gone lame, and he feared he'd freeze before dawn. Then, through the mist, he saw a small fire flickering beside a canyon wall. A woman sat there, wrapped in a hide cloak. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her eyes were bright as polished flint. "Evening, ma'am," he stammered. "Didn't mean to intrude." She nodded to the fire. "Warm yourself." He crouched beside her, grateful for the heat. "Ain't safe country for a lady to be alone." She smiled faintly. "It's safer than most towns I've known." He looked around, uneasy. "You got folks nearby?" She glanced toward the dark hills. "Always." When he awoke at dawn, the fire was cold and the woman was gone. Only the cross remained, lying in the ashes. He carried it to Tombstone and told his tale in every saloon that would listen. No one believed him, but every man there remembered the way his voice trembled when he spoke her name. Now, when the desert wind rises and sweeps across the mesas, it carries the faint sound of hoofbeats, soft, distant, eternal. They say it is Taza and Clara, riding together across the land they loved, their spirits bound to the earth and sky, lovers who defied two nations and outlived them both. And if you stand on the ridge above the San Pedro at dusk, when the world burns red and the wind sighs through the canyon, you might hear her whisper still. The wind remembers,